Welcome back. Now, Paul Nkuna has been widely acclaimed for his leadership of the Mineworkers Investment Company, particularly now at a time of market uncertainty when empowerment companies have come under threat. Under his watch, the net asset value of MIC's investment portfolio has grown from 500 million rands to 2.3 billion rands. He joins us now in studio. Paul Nkuna, thanks so much for your time. I think give us a sense of what it is that the Mineworkers Investment Company does, because there is so much uncertainty around the mining economy, around ownership of mines in the country, about rights of mine workers, and surely you're being seen as a mitigating force.
Okay. No, thank you. I think the first thing that one needs to spell out is what the Mineworkers Investment Company is all about and why we're actually really established in the first instance. In 1995, the National Executive Committee of the National Union of Mine Workers realized the fact that though blacks now have political power and a vote, there's a democracy, the fact of the matter was that conditions for mine workers, especially black mine workers, is not actually going to change. The low wages that they draw in the mines is not going to be over within 10 years or the next 20 years. And we asked ourselves, what is it that we need to do for a mine worker to actually really alleviate the load that a mine worker has? And we felt that in the area of education, there's something that needs to be done. In the area where we have, because the industry was declining, we also felt that there are those mine workers who are going to be retrenched, and how are they going to survive without employment? And that is how we actually really established. One, we formed a trust, and the purpose of the trust was to ensure that mine workers' children have access to institutions of higher learning. And as a result, we established a bursary scheme, which we called the JB Max Bursary Scheme. And that is because if you look at a mine worker, an ordinary black mine worker will never be in a position to pay the tuition fees that are actually really requested.
Okay, so you're sort of a developmental body for the mine workers, and you provide safety nets and your generational focus. Having raised your portfolio to just over 2.5 billion rands, the question is, what sort of investments are you making? Because some are already starting to say, junior miners in this country, in other words, black companies that own mining assets but can't afford to take on debt to have a controlling stake, they need some kind of a bailout, they need some kind of an assistance. Are you prepared to get in there?
No, that is the one area that we actually said we'll not get into. And why we actually not doing any investment in mining was the fact that the National Union of Mine Workers is organizing in that industry. And we wanted to avoid a situation where there would be a conflict of interest, where we would be seen as the organizers of the workers and the employers of the very workers. But that is how we actually said we'll not do any investments in mining. Our investments are predominantly in your media. We have Prime Media as one of our vehicles. We're by far the largest shareholder in Prime Media at 49.9%. We're into gaming with Piermont. We're into technology or IT with Tracker and Izazi, which is a small. We're into financial services with First Rand, and that's our financials. In the industrial space, we also have an investment with a company called Metrofile Documents Management or Document Storage. We also have what we call Westcon in the IT space.
Yes, okay, so media, ICT, so a lot of communications elements. Is there a particular reason for that? I mean, why not go into property? Why focus on the ICT side?
We have a philosophy in our investment, and the philosophy, one of them is we need to invest in companies that would be cash generative, which would enable us to support our trust social programs. So the one requirement that we want is that the company must be cash generative, and they must have the ability to pay a dividend. And the reason for that is that, one, if ever we have taken debt to buy into a company, we need that debt to be serviced. But other than that, if the debt is paid out, we need that constant flow of cash, which would enable us to support the social programs of the trust, being the bursary scheme, and we have in the rural area some projects like agricultural projects, and we assist individual black farmers and into being commercial farmers. So the trust needs a lot of cash resources.
In terms of your funding models, in terms of the projects that you're prepared to get into, to what extent are you governed by government's priorities? Because when you mention agriculture, it's one of the 5 pillars of the Jacob Zuma administration, for instance, rural development. If you look at the new growth path and the emphasis on labor-intensive industries, do you see that as a priority for you to align yourselves to what government is doing?
We do want to be aligned to government to a certain extent, but we're more guided by the mandate that we got when we were established. And that mandate was to go out and create a sustainable asset base that would enable our trust to carry out its social programs. And I think to that extent we have done very well. In the bursary scheme area, we have produced more than 800 graduates to date, and amongst them more than 15 doctors. That is an achievement, and that is a contribution towards the national goal. The majority of blacks did not have skills, and especially in the area of finance, you don't have chartered accountants and what have you. And so that is the role that we play. In the agricultural space, when I grew up, none of us would actually really think of taking a degree in agriculture, because where were you going to be using it? And right now we have a situation where we have land restitution. But when we give this land back to blacks, what are they going to do with it? I actually frequent Mpumalanga. And if you've been to the Kruger National Park, coming out of the Paul Kruger Gate, coming down towards a Hazy View, there used to be a citrus farm on your left-hand side. I think it was called Lisbon. Land restitution took place, and the farm is gone. It's dead, because we have not been able to support the black farmers that we actually really need.
Uncertainty in the mining economy. We see volatile prices, we see the margins of mining companies being squeezed because operational costs are rising. Workers, every time they protest, they say our wages are not going up and our security for the future is something to be worried about. So the question comes into the pensionable assets. To what extent do you come in to add some kind of complementary role to what the company ought to do in terms of helping the worker secure their future through a pension, and you providing that safety net? Do you see it as a responsibility?
The one thing that we actually really did when we were established, one of the core things that we actually really looked at was never to get involved with the mines, pensions and provident funds. We felt that we were not equipped for that. We were the new players in the space, and we never wanted to interfere in that. So in our whole 17 years of existence, we have never gone to the mines, pensions and provident funds for funding, and for the simple reason that we want the fund managers to be able to run with it without our interference. Where do we actually really come in at the end of the day is the projects that were, you know, the bulk of mine and construction workers, they come from the rural areas, and creating an environment where they could actually, even after pensioning, be able to play a meaningful role in our economy. Blacks are actually, especially those from the rural areas, they actually really have the farming experience, though not commercial farming. So when they go back, we don't want them to be dipping much into their pensions, but be able to sustain themselves through farming.
So new economies. Thanks so much for your time. Paul Nkuna, the CEO of the Mineworkers Investment Company, just showing us innovative solutions to Africa's problems by African companies and people.